The morning of September 11, 2001, began like any other in New York City. The sun rose over Manhattan, commuters flooded the streets, and workers settled into their offices at the World Trade Center. But by the end of the day, the world would be forever altered. At 8:46 a.m., American Airlines Flight 11 crashed into the North Tower. 17 minutes later, United Airlines Flight 175 struck the South Tower. By 9:37 a.m., the Pentagon was hit, and at 10:03 a.m., Flight 93 crashed in a Pennsylvania field after passengers fought back against the hijackers. Nearly 3,000 people lost their lives in a matter of hours. The official story was clear. 19 al-Qaeda hijackers, orchestrated by Osama bin Laden, had carried out the deadliest terrorist attack on American soil. But as the dust settled, both literally and figuratively, countless inconsistencies, suppressed testimonies, and unexplained anomalies began to surface. Why did Building 7 collapse when no plane hit it? Why were so many warnings ignored in the months leading up to the attacks? And why, more than 2 decades later, do thousands of experts, including architects, pilots, and former government officials, still question the official narrative? Today, we will delve deep into the mysteries of 9/11, examining the evidence, the contradictions, and the unsettling gaps in the story. This is not about promoting conspiracy theories. It's about asking the difficult questions that demand answers. When the Twin Towers fell, the world watched in stunned silence. The official explanation was that the intense heat from the jet fuel fires weakened the steel columns, causing a progressive collapse. But almost immediately, structural engineers and architects raised serious doubts. For one, no steel-framed skyscraper in history had ever collapsed due to fire alone, before or since 9/11. Fires had burned for hours in other tall buildings without causing total collapse. The towers didn't just fall, they disintegrated at near freefall speed, pulverizing into dust, a phenomenon more consistent with controlled demolitions than fire-induced failure. Then there's the issue of the molten metal found in the wreckage for weeks after the attacks. Jet fuel burns at around 1,500 degrees F, but steel requires temperatures of at least 2,750 degrees F to liquefy. So what caused the pools of molten metal beneath the rubble? Some researchers have pointed to the presence of thermitic material, a high-temperature incendiary compound found in the dust samples. Perhaps most startling is the testimony of first responders and witnesses who reported hearing explosions before and during the collapses. Firefighters described secondary explosions in the lower levels, and NYPD officers reported bombs going off in the basement. Were these just the sounds of collapsing floors, or was something else at play? Of all the tragedies that unfolded on that clear September morning, one story rose from the ashes with a defiant heartbeat, a story not just of terror, but of resistance. United Airlines Flight 93. It took off late. Scheduled to depart Newark, New Jersey at 8:00 a.m., the plane didn't leave the runway until 8:42. It was bound for San Francisco, carrying 44 souls, 33 passengers, 7 crew members, and 4 hijackers. Like the others, it was a transcontinental flight, heavy with fuel, ideal for destruction. But Flight 93 never reached its target. Instead, it crashed into a quiet field in Shanksville, Pennsylvania, leaving behind a smoldering crater, and one of the most poignant chapters of the 9/11 tragedy. The hijackers seized control around 9:28 a.m. Cockpit voice recordings, later released to investigators, revealed violent scuffles, screams. The pilot and co-pilot were likely killed or incapacitated. The plane turned southeast toward Washington, D.C. No one knows for certain what their final target was. The White House, the U.S. Capitol, the CIA headquarters, all were possibilities. All would have symbolized the destruction of American power and governance. But something extraordinary happened aboard Flight 93. Unlike the passengers on the other flights, those on Flight 93 had time. The delay in departure gave them a window, a small but critical chance to gather information. From airphones and cell phones, several passengers called their families. What they learned horrified them. They were not being held for ransom. This wasn't a typical hijacking. Planes had already been flown into the Twin Towers, another into the Pentagon. America was under attack. And with that realization, the cabin transformed, not into a scene of submission, but of strategy, courage, and resistance. Todd Beamer, Tom Burnett, Jeremy Glick, Mark Bingham. names that would soon become synonymous with heroism. Alongside others, they formed a plan. Armed with nothing more than boiling water, trays, and raw determination, they resolved to take the cockpit back. According to the cockpit recording, chaos erupted at 9:57 a.m. You can hear the men storming the front. Shouts, crashes, struggles. The hijackers, realizing they were losing control, plunged the plane downward. At 10:03 a.m., Flight 93 slammed into the ground at over 580 miles per hour. There were no survivors. But there were no victims either. Only heroes. In the days following, investigators combed the crash site. There was no wreckage like what you'd expect from a typical crash. Debris was scattered across miles. The impact was so severe that the aircraft was pulverized into fragments. And here is where the story begins to drift, once again, into the fog of speculation. Some asked, was it really a passenger revolt that brought the plane down? Or was it shot down by military jets? Eyewitnesses on the ground recall hearing a loud boom before the crash. Some said they saw smoke trailing behind the plane. Others claimed parts of the plane, like the engine, were found miles away, suggesting an explosion before impact. The military insists it never had the chance to intercept Flight 93, that no shoot-down order was relayed in time. Vice President Cheney later admitted he had authorized such an order, but communication delays meant it was never carried out. The official report is clear. The passengers, aware of their fate, chose to fight back, and in doing so they likely saved hundreds, perhaps thousands of lives on the ground. Still, skeptics question why so little physical evidence remains. Why was the crater so deep, yet devoid of large debris? Why were black boxes recovered in surprisingly intact condition, while other parts of the aircraft seemed to vanish? And why, years later, were the full cockpit recordings never publicly released in their entirety? But perhaps in the case of Flight 93, the mystery is less about what happened, and more about what it meant. In a day overwhelmed by horror, Flight 93 became a rare beacon of human agency. A moment where ordinary people, office workers, businessmen, mothers, fathers, took fate into their own hands. They didn't ask for glory, they didn't hesitate, they acted. "Let's roll," Todd Beamer was heard saying, 2 words, a call to courage, a phrase that would echo through history. In the years since that field in Shanksville has become hallowed ground, a national memorial now stands there, quiet, still, honoring not just the lives lost, but the fight waged. In a day marked by death, Flight 93 is a story of life, the life that could have been lost had they not acted. And in that final act of resistance, those 33 passengers and 7 crew members didn't just crash a plane. They altered the course of history. World Trade Center Building 7 was a 47-story skyscraper that wasn't struck by any plane, yet it collapsed at 5:20 p.m. on 9/11 in a perfectly symmetrical, near-freefall manner. The official report from NIST, the National Institute of Standards and Technology, claims that fires caused its collapse, a claim that has been fiercely contested by over 3,000 architects and engineers, who argue that no fire has ever caused a steel-framed high-rise to collapse in this way. What makes Building 7 even more suspicious is the fact that its collapse was announced by BBC News before it actually happened. Reporter Jane Stanley stated, "We're getting reports that the Salomon Brothers building has collapsed," while the building was still visibly standing in the background. How did the media know it was going to fall? Adding to the mystery, WTC-7 housed critical government offices, including the SEC, CIA, and Department of Defense. Millions of documents related to corporate fraud investigations were destroyed in its collapse. Was this a coincidence, or was Building 7 deliberately brought down? The Pentagon attack remains one of the most puzzling aspects of 9/11. Flight 77, a Boeing 757, allegedly struck the building, yet the physical evidence raises troubling questions. First, the damage hole in the Pentagon's facade was only about 16 feet wide, far too small for a 125-foot-wide airliner. Where were the wings, the tail, the engines? The official explanation is that the plane sliced into the building, but aviation experts argue that a 757's wings would have left massive impact marks. Second, the security camera footage released by the government shows only a blurry object striking the Pentagon, no clear image of a plane. Why was all other nearby surveillance footage confiscated by the FBI and never released? Third, multiple eyewitnesses reported seeing a smaller aircraft or even a missile-like projectile. Some described a white jet circling the area moments before impact. If Flight 77 didn't hit the Pentagon, what did? The official story names 19 hijackers, all linked to Al-Qaeda. But several of these men were later found alive, living in the Middle East. How could they have been both dead in the planes and alive afterward? Even more troubling are the hijackers' connections to intelligence agencies. At least two of them, Nawaf al-Hazmi and Khalid al-Miftar, were known to the CIA as early as 1999. Yet they were allowed to enter and move freely within the U.S. Why weren't they stopped? Then there's the case of Zacarias Moussaoui, the so-called 20th hijacker. Arrested in August 2001, he was carrying flight manuals and jihadist materials. The FBI's Minneapolis field office urgently warned headquarters, but their requests to investigate further were blocked. Who was protecting these men? Declassified documents reveal that multiple governments had advanced warnings of an impending attack. In August 2001, President Bush received a memo titled "Bin Laden Determined to Strike in U.S." Yet no action was taken. The NSA intercepted messages on September 10 saying, "Tomorrow is 0 hour," but the warnings weren't passed on. Foreign intelligence agencies, including those of Russia, Israel, and Germany, all alerted the U.S. about possible hijackings. Why were these warnings ignored? Was it incompetence, or was there a deliberate effort to allow the attacks to happen? The 9/11 Commission was supposed to provide answers, but even its own members admitted it was flawed. Key witnesses were never interviewed. Critical documents were withheld. The Commission's co-chairs later stated that the CIA obstructed our investigation. Why was the Commission denied access to crucial evidence? And why did it fail to hold anyone accountable for the intelligence failures? In the aftermath of 9/11, the U.S. launched the War on Terror, invading Afghanistan and Iraq. Trillions of dollars were spent. The Patriot Act expanded government surveillance. Defense contractors like Halliburton and Lockheed Martin saw massive profits. Oil prices soared. Was 9/11 used to justify a pre-existing agenda? Former NATO commander Wesley Clark once revealed that a Pentagon official told him in 2001, "We're going to take out 7 countries in 5 years." More than 2 decades later, the full truth about 9/11 remains hidden. Families of the victims continue to demand transparency. Whistleblowers and researchers keep uncovering new evidence. The question is no longer just what happened on 9/11, but why are we still being kept in the dark? Until all documents are declassified, until all witnesses are heard, and until all anomalies are explained, the mystery of 9/11 will endure. And so we must keep asking, keep digging, and keep demanding answers. Because the truth, no matter how uncomfortable, is the only way to honor those who were lost.